It's usually kind of chipped away by, good-intentioned folks that are concerned about some piece of it. And so the big idea through the process ends up getting smaller and smaller to make room for those kind of compromises. And I think we often end up with, decent policies, certainly no fault of legislators themselves. All of us are well-intentioned, wanting our best interests served, but we often end up as less than the sum of our parts. What this process is trying to do is to pay attention to the research that says, if you want faithful implementation, if you want change, if you want outsized results, again, whether it's in healthcare, education, corporate change, you've got to be able to move the involvement farther. You've got to best ideas out on the table. You have to have them tested for the best conditions. Best ideas have to have a chance of winning, not simply the people that have the most influence over the process. So the School Finance Partnership, although not perfect by any means, has at least attempted to say, people as stage, let's ask, what should the design principles be of a better school finance system? I thought, having watched just the tail end of it, was truly blown away by how well that turned out to be not just kind of a watered down version, but a fairly substantial set of big ideas. I've had a chance to look at this document. Great holiday gift, by the way. It's bold. It has big visions and big possibilities. The very active engagement, I think, proved this approach to be true. I think all the while people said, yeah, that's the easy part. We can get consensus. Policy. What we've tried to set up at this stage is, rather than just waiting, taking it, thank you for the principles, we'll show back up with the policy in January. A credit to the leadership of this finance partnership. They said, if we want to stay true to this vision, we have to get a lot of involvement here. We have to have the best ideas on the table, testing them. We'll find the best experts we can find. We'll give audience to the dissent and the healthy debate and dialogue. And that the belief is that if we do that, we'll end up with a bigger idea that's introduced as policy, and it will hold up over time. There will be less temptation to chip off the pieces of it. People will see it as a whole package and recognize that you can't do this piecemeal. It is a grand bargain, as people have talked about. So that's at least the hope. And that all of us kind of living up to that. We've done the best job I think we can to design the process. Now we all have to kind of step into the room together to play it out. You have a more extended sheet in front of you that outlines hopefully that got passed around. If you don't have that, this sheet that's titled School Finance Technical Advisory Group, if you don't have that, raise your hand and we'll try to get you a copy. So I won't read over. Just let me give you quick highlight of what the meeting design will be for each of these meetings over time. So now you'll have to, end of diagram 1. I'm trying to use my paper wisely. So each meeting will begin, as Senator Johnston outlined in that the topics, with some juicy topic that's unresolved. They've chosen the most complex, the topics that require the most technical conversation. There'll be provides the opening serve to bring into the room the best thinking that can be found on how to do the student count, on how to do the allocation methods, on what do you do about student count days. The remainder of the meeting is really the healthy debate and dialogue, the asking of questions. What is that? What about this? Did you take that into account? I've seen it otherwise. This is how it would affect me in our district. A space for that give and take. We'll do the best we can to not just simply put the concern, but actually have the idea and engage with again, creating conditions for the force of the better argument to be what holds sway. There's no attempt to reach a consensus by the end of that meeting, but there is an attempt to say, here's what we heard. We'll take that both from the meeting and, as you'll see in a minute, a really powerful online tool to keep the conversation going. Churn through it, synthesize it, take the best ideas, and serve those up a soft start of the next meeting. So if you want to come and see for 30 minutes before the next topic happens what the results of that dialogue were, we'll kind of share that back out. Here's where your ideas went. Here's the arguments that were presented. Here's how they were incorporated. Here's what they look like going forward. Again, the research is so clear. If you offer input and never hear back if it made a difference, you tend not to want to offer any more input. We want to take that really seriously and come back to you and to say, here's the best that we heard. Here's what we did with it. You may still have some disagreements with it, but we're hoping that at the end of the day, that everybody can find at least something to love and something to hold their nose with the ultimate policy, and that broad coalition that's been evolving over time will stay intact. So that's the hope, at least. And again, this is the world I live in and dream of every day, and so it's easy for me to get excited about it, but I have deep appreciation for the leadership of the partnership that was willing to take a risk. It's a lot easier to go this path, to hold your cards close and introduce something on day one. And so I hope that if there's missteps and confusion and concerns along the way, that it's at least balanced against the alternative that usually prevails. So, all right, I think that's all of the kind of opening remarks. We want to just create for the next half hour, 45 minutes, at least some time for you to ask questions, to get clear on what are you talking about? What is this? When will this happen? How does this work? We'll do our best to just kind of keep this an easy moving dialogue, but if we have to kind of queue up people's comments, we can go to raising people's hands. I don't know if we'll be able to move the mic around this kind of non-amplifying mic, but at least let's see if there's some opening questions from those of you sitting in the circle. Yes, Senator Bundells.
Listen over the internet to any of these meetings, or is it all going to be posted on the website after?
You'll see me do this a lot. Go back to the team of the children's campaign and
you will record it and post it as soon as possible. So it's posted later.
It is posted.
It's not, we don't plan to live stream it. Got it.
not that fancy yet.
Well, you are in this room.
I didn't hear any mention of non-English speaking students in your breakouts of people making presentations. I wasn't sure where that might be incorporated in the discussion. And then the other thing that I was curious about is obviously the revenue side of it is a big component, and I didn't see anything that specifically addressed that piece of it as well.
Let me try to send Johnston to the real answer, but I will say that you will note that not every topic that's in the design principles will appear on the discussions going forward, so we'll try to attend to how they chose these and where that might play out. But just as an opening statement, that will be true in a number of topics. But Johnston, you want to
Great question, and we talked about this some. To the ELL question, that is part of the conversation about weights and categoricals. So what role should it play? Should it be a larger weight or categorical? Should it be smaller? How do we allocate dollars linked to that at-risk definition now, or to an ELL definition? And then on your second question of revenue, we assumed explicitly that would come in our early childhood conversation, in the ECE and full day K conversation as one means of revenue. But we also left the last meeting open with the idea that would be anything that we felt hasn't gotten adequate treatment throughout the first 4 meetings we could have as a full conversation. So I think what we're going to find is how much revenue goes where depends on what existing revenue still goes where. And so I think that that's meant to be an explicit part of the conversation in that day on ECE and full day K. But also something we're imagining will weave throughout the conversation.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
In thinking about the principle that you have around sufficiency of base amount, I'm assuming, and that we kind of get to the report again, how is that then looking at being addressed in the conversation, or how is that work going to be utilized in the current?
So if you, and I double-checked our meetings, and under meeting 4, the explicit half of the meeting is just on the revenue side. So we have 2 sections, one is ECE and full day K. The second half of that meeting is all just on efficiency and the revenue question. And so that is in meeting 4 right now. That was the question. Was there another part you wanted to ask?
That's fine. I'll wait. Okay. I know how to read you.
Great.
First, great job putting all this together. I know it's a lot of moving pieces. You guys put a nice thing together. And I guess I'm curious about, let's take the first event as an example, where Ken Long is coming in from Brown University to talk about weights and categorical. Can you just give a sense of how that session runs? Is Ken coming in and saying, hey, look, I want to share with you some of the ideas, the thoughts I've had based on the report that was created, and how that might actually play out for some districts? Because I guess what I'm anticipating is that when you're sitting there as a school or a district, you're thinking, how does this affect me? Right? And if you're waiting until that time to get the information, then the answer to that question is, I don't know, but I got to hurry and find out. And so I'm just kind of curious how much ahead of time either like Ken would look at how that affects schools and districts in the state, his recommendations, or if there's some information coming out ahead of time so that people can start to say, wow, how does that affect me if I get my interests, and how might I then engage in that conversation?
That's a great question. Our original thought was that he or she or whoever's coming would come and present a set of ideas, and there might be 20 that get thrown on the wall, and there might be 15 of them we like or 5 of them we like. And so I don't know that there's a way for him to come and say, I've pre-packaged 20 potential school finance runs based on any of these given formulas, because you don't know if it's a ACE or ABDZ or just A. And so like the lottery, the potential combinations become significant quickly. So I think that what we were anticipating was presenters would come, talk us through some ideas. We would have feedback about ideas. Then at the end of that meeting, we would say, well, it might now be interesting to look at, by the next meeting, implications of what 3 or 4 of these opportunities might look like. So because I think that we've asked him to look at the partnership document, bring his own research and work he's done advising other states, and come and give us his thoughts. So we don't know exactly what he's going to say or what he's going to propose, but the goal would be to be able to take that, massage it some, and then look at potential impact afterwards.
And so is the Hope Street workspace a place where some of that conversation then would occur? If I'm getting this right.
Actually, I think, Tony, you've also given me a thought of how we might kind of help the presenters prepare.
Also, the critical importance of having the actual dialogue, to have school officials respond real time to the implications of ideas, who will even be better be able to identify the exact implications. They might not have all the time in it, but
not simply an idea that lives in theory, but that's what we're trying to create in this conversation.
And yes, part of that conversation is the online forum afterward, and then the subsequent meetings to be able to debrief after people have gone back, which is the kind of soft start that Bill was talking about. But yes, the online forum would be a place where we can continue to post implications of recommendations that people saw from the last meeting.
That makes sense. I think the debrief at that next meeting could take the whole next meeting.
Yeah,
so,
it's true. It's a good point.
It'd be challenging.
Yep.
This is a lot of top-down model. Well, how does subsidiarity of individual districts fit into this? I mean, we've now evolved into a system where there's a lot of freedom for districts. If they want to implement something, they go to the ballot, they ask for an override or some additional funding. How does this fit into this, or is this going to be so rigid that they no longer have that opportunity?
I would just add something from the partnership. The time I spent there, that flexibility was really a theme, I think, when I think about what came out of the partnership recommendations. So I'm hopeful that that's not the case, but that's why you're here. And I'm hearing you say that what you're seeing as a beginning point, that your recommendation, that principles that feels like that could be an outcome. So I think that will be important input throughout the process. So maybe Senator Johnston wants to.
I was going to say, I have no idea what the answer to that question is. I think the answer to the question is how ought we think it to be structured so that there's flexibility and adequacy at the same time. So no plan on the question that you raised, other than let's talk about how do you both solve the equity problem and make sure you have adequate local opportunities to raise revenue the way that you want to. So I can't ever imagine there being any sort of ban on any district choosing to add revenue. That would be a good thing, no doubt.
I mean, that's just a quick follow-up question. Given the fact that that was such a frequent interest in the partnership, especially in the decontamination, I'd just be curious if there's a part of this that sends a message that wouldn't be there, or
what cues you've picked up that make you Oh, I see. Well, that's a great point. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. So this is really the beginning of it. So the topics that are remaining to be worked out are the ones that are most complicated and controversial. The desire for innovation and flexibility is in some ways not controversial in that sense, that it's trying to maximize both. So the full range of things that will end up in the policy process are, starts with this. This is just the remaining ones to be worked out. So I think Jane was next in the ring.
My question is how was the tag
Picked, and do we know that they have proven policy remedies, or is it more hypothesis and research? But do they represent, can they represent proven policy remedies?
I don't care. I mean, my perspective is that the tag is a place for us to start this conversation. It's hard to, a lot of people have been like, is there something already, baked here? And I said, no, but you have to have enough that people can then have a response, right? You can't, like the blank page that we had for the school finance partnership, I think we're hoping that this can give us something to respond to. So I don't know that the tag is that we're saying this is an answer, or this is a place to begin a conversation and start getting feedback, but
So as someone who likes literary analogies, Jane, I would see this as, what are the 10 greatest American novels? Right? I mean, so we started with a handful of people who we thought were leading researchers in this space who have thought a lot about it and have a lot of expertise and have seen other states and work. But the design of the poster group is that after that comes and you have that debate and someone says, this is clearly not the best American novel, I would actually propose an alternative, which is some other body of research or body of experts or body of evidence that we think should enter this conversation. The space is designed to be open for it to be additive. But as Chris said, we needed to start with some people who we thought were experts on these specific areas, who could frame the issues and had experience working with state-level efforts of this type before. So it's not at all an exhaustive list, it's just an initial list.
Are there tag members? Oh, sorry, I didn't say. Yeah, go.
First of all, thank you for pulling this together and trying to herd us cats. It's a global effort. We can achieve something here. A couple questions. One, I understood you say that the goal here is to look for legislation in the 2013 session that would reflect consensus from this group. Did I also hear you say there's plans for ballot measure in 2013 that would to provide equity funding that would support this model? I just didn't.
Sure. No, that's a very important question, and I apologize that I wasn't clear about that. I think the basic commitment of the consensus of the finance partnership is that to build a world-class education system in Colorado, you're both going to need additional revenues, and you're going to need changes to the way that the school finance formula operates, and that those two have to be done in conjunction. And so, yes, my preferred course of action is to be able to propose legislation that addresses changes to the finance formula that is linked to a ballot initiative that addresses the need for revenue, and that those two are inextricably linked, so you can't have one without the other. That actually the changes to the formula are triggered by the addition of new revenue, so that you're not asking a new finance formula to operate without the revenue it needs to be effective. So there may be disagreement in this room about that. My belief is you can't do one without the other. It has to be a partnership of both. And so the goal here would be that the nature of our system is that one can be done legislatively and one is done at the ballot. And so we need success in both places, but our strategy would be to link them together. So we're all on board to help pass both. And I would just add to your point that obviously our goal is consensus. I don't have, I'm optimistic that when this is passed, there will be consensus. I am not holding myself to the belief that there will be consensus when it's introduced. Right? I think that we're going to have, every one of these issues are so controversial that any combination of them is going to bound to have folks who want changes. And so I think our commitment is to stay at the table eternally from now until May 10th or whenever the session ends and say, how do we get the very best system? with the knowledge that in Bill's example, sort of I think the boldness of the finance reform idea is linked to the boldness of the revenue initiative, which is if we get to the system where you've chipped the original idea down from its one size to 1/10 of its size, I think it's hard to go with a 1/10 of a size idea at a 10/10 of a size revenue ask. I mean, so for me, the challenging work is you have to keep both. You have to keep the boldness of both halves together if you're going to get the big pink box that Bill.
Okay, quick follow-up.
Well, it's kind of related, I guess. That was just, so I understood that the initial topics that we were tackling are, dare I say, the low-hanging fruit, or a place where it felt like there was more consent, more agreement, and that I heard you say we're going to wait on controversial issues. So maybe my question is more, how did we come to these? And are there plans to tackle some of the other concepts on the road? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is the highest hanging fruit. I think these are actually some of the most complicated and thorny questions that people had the most passionate responses around the idea of any changes. And so I think this attempt was, these are ones that take far more research, attention, discussion, debate.
And just in case I was confusing, pointing to this, I meant there's a lot in here that has high levels of consensus that is the low-hanging fruit that we won't be talking about because it's the low-hanging fruit. So hopefully that makes more sense. Randy, the Mayor.
Yeah, one of the big ideas that I'm not sure was even really touched on, although it may have kind of been an undercurrent in the whole report, was, and a fear I had, was that we spend all this time building a 21st century funding system for an education system that's organized on a 19th century model. And we're still talking about the impacts on districts and giving schools within districts flexibility. There's a little bit of talk about funding actually following students to the things that they need. That, I think, is one of the, and coming from the online community, that's one of those ideas that I think we need to keep out there, that districts aren't going away, local schools aren't going away by any means, but what the constituents in their districts are looking for in terms of where do I get my education. We're already seeing it in concurrent enrollment and how much we've expanded that in the state. Literally, 9th grade on, kids can go almost anywhere to get college courses. We're seeing more and more online opportunities. We're starting to see states experiment with that backpack funding of, okay, if you want to take this course here, this amount of funding will follow you to that. I think we need to keep those ideas in mind as we start exploring this, that there's no reason if this school or this district has the best chemistry teacher that a student from a neighboring district shouldn't be able to go take chemistry from that teacher, or music, or any of the other things. So not to keep too focused in those geographically defined school districts and miss the opportunity here. And I think to Jane's question about are we looking at proven models, when we start talking 21st century funding, I think if somebody comes in with a proven model, it's probably old hat and we don't want to hear it.
Since you're commenting also on the content of this document, I would also, at times, members of the School Finance Partnership or anyone who's spent some time and has some thoughts on what the principals themselves might say to a given question, I can certainly also add your thoughts to it. So, I don't know, there's folks, these are upcoming questions. Let's go Mary, Charlotte, and actually, Mary, Charlotte.
I just have a tiny point of clarification. Are there CAD members that aren't on this list, or is it looks like Ken and Marguerite, and then CE folks, like council folks, and like legal services folks?
So I think the other misnomer we've had is in the idea of the name. So there are kind of people that are doing advising, and there are people that are doing deliberating. So the more important of the two groups is the deliberative body, which is the district. So there will be different kind of guest presenters who come to present on various topics, and then we will engage in the conversation about those. But the list you see of the folks who are presenting are the folks that we have signed up now to present. If you think there are big holes in either expertise or content area, we do have a final meeting that we've kept open for that kind of feedback.
So my question is about how the guiding questions were developed, and since I know right now that it's a shoot straight for early learning on early communication under number 4A. My reason I raise it, I guess, is because I see that one single question there as perhaps it's an attempt to be as broad as possible, but I also see it could be actually fundamental, and people go straight to how much will this cost, when some additional questions might well be, and how much might it save long-term when we're talking EC in particular, and also reflecting the information that's actually contained in the report about this item. What are some creative ways in which early childhood education might be delivered? Now, a little bit going back to our colleague right to the right about let's not let this one get locked in either by school district, school calendars that are tied to agriculture and all those sorts of things that have built up over time, and early childhood education is actually being delivered now quite differently. And so I just wonder about, is there room within these, and I understand this is an outline, there may be others that have a similar issue with the one question that's been pulled out, and how else might both the presenters charge, if you will, but also the dialoguers ability to go beyond that. How do we make sure that we're not limiting ourselves by these questions?
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's one that we clearly should add and needs to be part of the conversation. And actually, well, I'll maybe put Wendy in the spot in a minute, but I think one of the things that would be great is that actually, once we get our online tool up, is people could put comments in advance of sessions to be able to say, you know what, seems to be another key question that the presenter should address would be this, and then we can have our presenters make sure they have that data before they come so they're prepared. But completely agree, Charlotte, and that was one of the reasons why we linked the revenue section to the early childhood sections. I think thanks to Mary's guidance and some others, I think there is a real conversation about the link between the return on investment there and how do you think about the cost, how do you think about the revenues, and how do you think about the structure. So that's the central question about that.
Having been through a couple of false starts with interim school finance committees over the last decade, and all the work that went into it for not, I'm concerned that we're mostly friends of education here, and I don't see many Republicans here, and I'm wondering in terms of once this thing starts getting momentum and we get in front, it would be great to have bipartisan support as we go through the Capitol. So I was wondering, is there anybody either in the House or Senate that could partner with us and be involved and advocate for all this work that we do, rather than coming in at the tail end and just shooting arrows?
But I'm sure you didn't mean to say this way, but I wouldn't want anyone to hear that as Republicans aren't represented, nor that they are.
I'm here.
So I'm sure that's not your intention, but I'm sure it was an inclusive vote.
Great point. There were a handful of people who've been very involved in this work along the way. Obviously, Raleigh Heath has. Jesse's very interested and invested in this. And so we've reached out to a number of folks to come to this preliminary meeting, but we're going to send out after today an invitation to all of the House and Senate Education Committee members to all the future meetings with the content aligned to make an open invitation. And then we do have a number of handful of targeted legislators who we think would be particularly interested in this on both sides of the aisle. We're going to push even harder to get, and I've had some good advice from people around the table on that. But yes, our full goal is that this would be a bipartisan effort when it comes to the legislature in January. And so, I think they're wiser and more experienced folks in this room who navigated the C and D coalition who were able to build, looking at Kerry, were able to build that kind of coalition. And so we'd like to be able to do that. But we also think that, for me, I'm not willing to back off of the belief that revenue is part of the solution. So for folks for whom that can be part of the solution, we need to have them in the coalition. For folks for whom that's a non-starter, completely understand, I would just respectfully disagree that we need to do that part to do the whole package.
I think, again, building off the work of the partnership, we really were committed, and I think very diverse partnership membership. So I think, I know there are people affected who are very interested in that. So some of them are in this room, ready to call anybody out on their purge or anything, but I do feel good that as far as the community, and I completely agree with your point, as far as the community that's been involved in now, it's really diverse.
I agree, but once it gets in this building, everything changes.
On the play.
That was all the things I saw in the video tonight.
Do you see the role of the steering committee being from here on out in terms of this process? What I'm hearing is that the advisory group is not really an advisory group as much as it is a place to bounce ideas, and that's one question, I guess. The next question is, what is the role of the people who spent a year and a half on this report? What do you see their role being into, I guess, the conclusion of this work in November and into the session?
Great question. I think that the steering committee obviously has, as all of the members of the partnership have, a critical interest in making sure we get these policies right. And so obviously they were the first folks we reached out to and briefed on the concept of doing this and doing an advisory group. We met maybe a couple months ago about that idea. Asked them all to join and to be a part of this process. Some members said, we'd love to do it. Some said, we don't want to be involved in this process once it approaches legislation. We're only in the principles idea. And so we found some that peeled off. Most, we were excited to say, have stayed on. And I see this role as the most fundamental part of the partnership, which is now the process of saying, here are the big ideas. Let's talk about them, give advice on them, advise on how they should be included and what they should look like and what the possible implications are, and then help build the best possible piece of legislation out of it. So I think that is exactly the structure we are envisioning, was to include all those folks in this, but also for it not to be exclusive, that other stakeholders on the stage who wanted to be a part of it, or individual members of associations who are represented on the group that wanted to be present, could be here and had an open door and a place to give advice as well.
I might just, for those that were on that steering committee, maybe just follow up on there, who have helped formulate the initial principles, and now as we watch it kind of broaden, if there's any comments, and I'm looking to Bob and Carrie as co-chair to that, comments that, questions that have been asked that we didn't, that you might have wanted to weigh in on, or on topics of content of it, or members of the partnership, and then we'll introduce Wendy to introduce you guys to the Oak Street tool. Bob, or any other members of the steering committee?
Bill?
Yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
So, I think there's, what I'm a little concerned about is I'm hearing kind of a bright line between the work that's happened to this point and the work that happens forward. And I think that there should be some recognition that it wasn't just big ideas that came out in the negotiations to pull up this report and to build a consensus. It was really a lot of what was, between and linking the ideas together that allowed this thing to happen. So I don't want to lose that by just taking the ideas that we probably could have formulated in our first meeting 18 months ago and said, here are the big ideas. How do you get some of the richness of the conversation and the perspective that was gained, and also try to maintain some sense of continuity and commitment to what was already agreed to in this report when it comes to going for additional resources? Because that to me was the key. I mean, it's not just about talking about the differences, it's about building a political group that can go out and say, and here's how we're going to do it together. So I want to make sure that there's some memory there about that.
I think that's exactly the design principle of this process, which is there were a set of principles that we're committed to. To get from those principles to practice, we're going to have to make those more specific and more detailed. And to keep a coalition together to both pass legislation and a ballot initiative, you're going to need proposals that are bold on both sides, both bold on revenue and bold on reform on the finance system, and that will be complicated. But the only way to do that is to keep all of the stakeholders that have been invested all the way through still involved. But I think that what we've found is that to get through some of the details of that process is going to mean there will be times where certain members of the partnership agree and certain members don't, and we'll have to work through that. But if we put in a gating mechanism that said, it is only at X threshold where consensus is reached on all issues to move forward, I think the risk is we never move forward. And so, which is why I opened with the statement that doing nothing is not an option. And so, and I think taking Bill's example of whittling a big idea down to a very small idea and then still calling it something is also probably not a solution either for our grand hopes of a bargain. And so this seemed to be the best way to manage the process of keeping a commitment to both bold revenue and bold reform, and also keeping as transparent and inclusive and engaged and cooperative a process all the way through as we could. So that's the goal, and that's the reason for the design.
And is this group truly synonymous with what I thought was a separate group called the Technical Advisory Group? Is this the same thing?
This is it. This is the same thing. Okay, so
making sure.
Bad branding on our parts.
Do a good synonym for the technical feedback group, but there's too many consonants. It's really awkward. But I think I kind of said this when I opened, and so I was like, oh, I think the semantics of it get us in trouble, right? It's like, am I on the tag? Am I not on the tag? I really think that's just a shorthand for the fact that we felt like at this point we needed more technical expertise. Senator Johnston said, I can't just, take this. It really needs more technical expertise to turn this into something that's on policy. So I don't want us to get too caught up in that name. I think that's just semantics,
I just want to, just from a process standpoint, to your point of there is an acknowledged transition